Hello, I am Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to Work Matters with Pastor Will. This is our new series at Emmanuel Lutheran where we talk about issues of faith, work, and economics. Today we are going to highlight Dr. Steve Paulson. He's from the Luther House of Studies in South Dakota. And he's going to lift up various issues that connect faith and work and economics. Now, he gave this lecture last year at Emmanuel, and that was before we had COVID-19, before we had all the unemployment issues with businesses both stopping for several months and now slowly reopening, and now we have even protests on the street. All those things now will affect how we discuss this connection between faith, work, and economics today. We have two sessions. The first, he will lift up the connection between work and the Ten Commandments. And you might say, what? The Ten Commandments, are they still in use? Well, yes. Watch and see what he does in making those connections, as well as the second session where he lifts up the question, is happiness what work is all about? And so now to lead us in this conversation, I invite Pastor Will to lead us into this very important conversation.
Thank you, Pastor Rick. Welcome, everyone, to Work Matters with me, Pastor Will. We're so glad you could join us this morning. This is the second part in a two-part series from Dr. Steve Paulson of the Luther House of Study in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. In today's episode, Dr. Paulson is talking about our calls in our lives, and specifically the goals of our call in our lives. Is happiness the goal of it all, or is it something else? And what about these calls? Where do our calls come from? Do they come from within? Is it mom and dad telling us do what makes you happy in life? Or do our calls come from somewhere else, or even someone else? And how about our character? Who we are? Does our call define our character, or does our character define our call? And finally, faith. What about faith? What role does faith play in all of this talk about call and character and happiness, for that matter? Well, Dr. Paulson is here to provide all the answers and so much more. Now, this is a rather long video at 20 minutes, longer than usual, but I hope you do watch the whole thing because it has some great information for us to learn about our calls. So please watch, and I will be back on the backside of it. Enjoy.
What we teach about callings in life, our vocations in life, and how then we actually understand what it means to have a vocation that is only under the law, that creates anxiety, and a vocation that is under the gospel that opens you up freely. This is going to move in two very different directions, and here we've already reached one of the important matters of evangelical teaching. Whenever you come upon a topic like vocation, vocation means a calling. Calling means you do not call yourself. That's the first thing in vocation. You can't sit by yourself, with yourself, and come up with a vocation. I've had many, when I taught in college, I had students coming to me over and over again because they heard that I knew something about speaking to young kids about what they should do. And that's what they all want. They come to college and they don't know what they should do. And they're waiting for somebody to tell them. And nobody would tell them, except Dr. Paulson. So they'd said, they'd come over and say, okay, I'll tell you exactly what to do in this situation. I wasn't shy about that in any way, shape, or form. So the first thing that they had to learn was that the call was not inside them. That's what everybody was telling them. Including their dear parents, because when they went home to their parents, they would say, dear parents, what should I be majoring in? What kind of career should I go into? And what do the dear parents say to them? Whatever makes you happy. This turns you back into yourself, and you now have to figure out, where is my happy place? Where is my happiness going to come? And when you actually look at the number of callings in life, and being an insurance agent or running a business and so on, these things don't look like they're going to produce a wonderful passion of happiness that's coming out of a person. So they look at these things and say, well, no, I don't really want that. Well, what then gives you passion? Well, playing in a rock band with my guitar. That's it. I mean, it's not going anywhere else. And here, we actually are teaching our children to go back into themselves and identify happiness within themselves, and that itself will produce happiness. No, it won't. If that's not where it comes from, that's not where you find it, that's not how this actually happens in life. And so the first thing I do with my young people is not turn them back into themselves to say, well, what makes you happy? That, by the way, is an old philosophy that goes back to Aristotle. The second most important of all the philosophers beside Plato, and Aristotle is the one who used his Greek word eudaimonia to tell you that this is the way you find your way in life. You identify your happiness, eudaimonia, and then you move from there to determine what choices you're going to make in life. And when you do this, you end up making very bad choices, one after the other. Even Aristotle knew this. He said, well, I don't know what else to tell people. What else is there? Because, of course, he had no preacher, knew nothing about the God that gives the gospel. He knew only the matter of the law, and he did his best with it. So I'm not going to blame him for this particular matter. But we actually have received something more than this. Yeah, go ahead.
Heraclitus in 500 BC who said, character becomes destiny.
Yes.
And
well, this is correct.
I know of that one as well.
Yeah, that's correct. But now we can start to identify what character is. Now I can say something about this. How does character actually come to be formed? Remember, Aristotle thought the way character was formed was the way an Olympic athlete operated. If you want to run in the Olympics, what do? Practice, 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 until the practice becomes second nature, then it becomes character, and character actually justifies. Now, we have something different to say here, and it is quite shocking. Your character does not come from exercise and practice, though there are going to be goals that you will need to reach through exercise and practice. That works in a kind of a short way, a kind of a small, narrow window. It works there. But it does not work in relationship to God, who actually provides your character. This is very interesting. And how does he do this? Not through work and sweat and so forth, but by calling you. And how does he call you? By naming you. And therefore, what he is doing is actually giving you a promise. Now, I'm glad to have these comments, but now I'm a little ahead of myself, but I'll stop and say this. If trust and faith is what life is all about, which is what we're saying now as a Lutheran, then you have to ask yourself, how do you get faith? Where does it come from? How do you find it when you don't have it? And specifically, if faith is not an exercise over time that produces character, that's not what faith is, then how do you actually come upon this? How does this actually happen? Many of you will know this either in your own lives or in those you've been counseling or helping with your children, your grandchildren, and so on. When faith is lost between a husband and wife, it is very difficult to get it back. When faith is lost between a parent and a child, it is very difficult to get this back. So when the parent says, I trust you, I'm now going to give you the keys to the car, and then something is done that is improper and problematic and perhaps even life-threatening, it is actually difficult to regain that particular matter of trust. And usually the only way we can figure out to do it is this way. We put the person back into a situation where we are now going to exercise or test them repeatedly. Here's an exercise, have you fulfilled it? If you fulfilled it, then I have gotten this much further along in the matter of trust. But here, our Lord looks down upon us and says, we've got a really big problem now between you and me. This problem didn't begin with you, it's been handed down to you, age by age. And it began with Adam and Eve. This is what we mean by the fall. And the fall is Adam and Eve fell out of trust with their Lord. Now, how do you get this back once it's lost? How does that actually happen? How do you make faith where there isn't any faith? This is God's project. But it is God's project to make the faith. He is going to do this within the manner of what we call the creed, that is, with what he does, not with what you do. If he waited around for you to get your life together and so that you would be trustworthy, how long do you suppose God is going to be waiting? So he's sitting up there twiddling his thumbs. Luther says, you make God into a sleeping God. There he is. He's going like this saying, well, have you improved? Have you gotten a little bit better? And when he gives you the test day by day, there's not much movement there. I don't know if we can establish trust at this point or in this particular way. But here is a very interesting thing. Luther discovered that the law tells you practice, 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 exercise, 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 prove your worth, then you will get the reward, which is trust, at the end of the line. So at the end of the line, God will finally trust you after not being sure for a long time in your life. But Luther says, this is nothing other than the rule of the law, and if the law was the only thing God had to make faith, then we are most to be pitied, since we know that it's not being produced, and we can feel it, and it produces in us anxiety. Anxiety not just in relationship to others, but anxiety to God, because we say, what does he think of me? Yesterday I felt fairly good about it, but now, today, I don't feel quite as good. And it goes up, it goes down, it goes left, it goes right, we're not quite sure. And all of this comes back to this matter of whether the anxiety of not trusting that this God actually trusts you is extremely damaging for people. And it stultifies them. It makes them want to bury their coin in the ground and not go anywhere, not do anything, not rock the boat, not enter into risk, which of course is one of the main matters of what you do with an economy and what we mean by the use of your money and so on. So here Luther discovers something. It was sitting right there in Scripture. Paul especially kept saying it. God does not wait for you to produce faith in him. He gives it to you. How does he give it to you? He gives it to you by calling you, vocating you, by actually calling you out of your old life as Adam and Eve, who was constantly trying to hide from this God. Remember, Adam and Eve didn't dig a hole. They went and found a palm leaf, right? And tried to cover themselves with a palm leaf so that God wouldn't look down on them and find them unworthy and so on, right? So Luther recognizes that God is going to have to make this particular faith in you because you can't produce it. How then does he do it? He does it by speaking a word. But the word is not the one that we're used to. The word that we're used to in day-to-day life, in relationship to other people, as the book of Genesis says, under the curse, where we work in the sweat of our brow, there the word that we know is the word of the law. And what does the law say? I will trust you when you become worthy of my trust. That's what the law says. And therefore God is going to check day in and day out your worthiness. And how comfortable do you feel with this? How is your worthy meter? Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. Once again, you go back into this matter of anxiety. Then Luther says, but there is a new word, a word that the world doesn't know and can't say to itself. And it is a word that you don't have inside yourself. It comes from outside. And that word is not the law, it is the gospel. And how does the gospel sound? Now here's how God makes faith where there isn't any. He does not make it through the law and morality. He makes it apart from these in the form of a promise. There's your answer. How does God make faith where there isn't any? This is what we actually mean by creation. The key matter of creation is God making something where there was nothing. This has a name in theology. It's called creation ex nihilo. And since you've got this up here, I should write something, don't you think? And anytime we have something important, then I'm going to put it in Latin so you can go home and say, well, I don't know what he was talking about, but I learned one Latin word today. So here it is. This is creation ex nihilo. Creation out of nothing. This is what we mean. There was no faith there, and he came and provided it. He came and gave it. Now, what makes faith? It is not a power in you to become worthy of another faith. Faith is made in the word of the gospel, which is not a command telling you what to do, but is in the form of a promise. A promise actually makes faith when there isn't any faith. How does a promise do that? So God comes and it does not give you a command, he gives you a promise. The promise says, in yourself, not worthy. Under the law, you have hidden your talent. But now, in the gospel, I forgive you. And when I forgive you, I give you this promise. All that you have, all of the weight, all of your anxiety, which is what we mean by the load of sin, my Son Christ takes upon himself and defeats once and for all on the cross. And when he does this now, he takes your sin and weight upon himself, and he gives you what is his. This is what we call this wonderful exchange between ourselves and Christ, the joyful exchange, in which Christ takes our sin and he gives us his own righteousness. His own righteousness is his favor from his Father. And the favor from his Father now says, as I think of my Son Jesus Christ, as I love my Christ, I now love you. And in this particular way, I give this promise to you without any string attached. We have different words for this. We say no string attached, unconditionally. The word that Paul usually uses is freely. It's given freely. And for the first time, you have something that is actually free. And in this way now, you are given a promise, and that promise itself, though it came from another, from our Heavenly Father, to us, it actually makes faith in us. Since we say, well, if you so favor me, not on account of what I've done, but on account of what your Son does, then I have nothing to fear. I have no anxiety, the fear that at any moment I might be unworthy and in fact receive your harsh judgment of death. That is all behind me now. And I can live my life not wondering when the next shoe is going to drop and I'm going to die, but the death is already behind me. And lo and behold, this is exactly the way Paul describes your baptism. This is where that promise first comes, and in Romans chapter 6 he says your baptism is a baptism into a death, but it is a death like Christ's. And therefore, a death like Christ's is also a resurrection like Christ, which is a brand new life. And this new life comes out no longer wondering who you are, what God thinks of you. Now you actually know. And when you wake up in the morning, you don't have to say, how am I doing, Heavenly Father, according to your law? Now you say, according to your promise, you favor me. And in this favoring now, I can work freely. I can actually move into my vocation and calling so that I understand that I am not establishing my trustworthiness in this. And when I can do this, then I can actually start to reach out to others with risk, with an understanding that in my vocation, what I am doing is not trying to produce my happiness. My happiness has now been given to me. This is a peace that passes understanding. This is what joy actually means. This is the end of my anxiety about what this God actually thinks of me. And when that happens, then I can open up in new ways to those who are around me. I can hear what they need, and I don't have to fear that it will either sully me, dirty me, or it will take something away from me. And lo and behold, I know something else. I think I could say this at this point. My vocation is not in the end going to be what my worth is. So that at the end of my days, I look back and say, that's my worth. My worth has already been given to me in Jesus Christ. So what is my vocation? My vocation is learning how to give my whole self to those who are around me. Paul says, Romans chapter 12, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. This is to your neighbor. And what is your neighbor going to do? Well, the neighbor is going to use everything you've got for his help or her help and need. That's what's going to happen.
Wow. What a wonderful video from Dr. Paulson that talks about our call in life. And I know for me, thinking about my call, my vocation under the gospel is much, much, much better than thinking about my vocation under the law, because I place myself under the law constantly and I can feel that anxiety well up in me. I don't know about you, but to be given this faith from God and then to use this faith in a way that frees us to live out our call in life, to live out our created purpose in life, is just an amazing, life-giving thing from our Creator. And so I hope you enjoyed this video. We would love your feedback. We would love to have a conversation with you. Check us out on Facebook. Search for Naples Emmanuel or Emmanuel Community Park. You can comment on either page. I watch them and I would love to reply and engage in a conversation with you. Thank you for watching this episode of Work Matters with me, Pastor Will. We will see you next week. Take care. May the peace of Christ be with you always.